As a child growing up, Dan was known as a very quiet, shy kid. Every time we were on a playground or at a park, it was up to me to ask the other kids to play with us. I'm sure that there are a few of his teachers at John Street who didn't get many chances to hear his voice. Once he got to Carey, though, he seemed to have no problem speaking, let alone yelling, throughout the hallways.
Michael and Danny Babich, both Carey graduates. Michael in 2010, Danny graduated in 2008. Danny, varsity football player, varsity baseball player. Mike, also varsity football player. Two great kids left here on their own paths. Unfortunately, on May 1st, 2015, Dan took his own life. Mike has been kind enough to sit down with me today and talk about his story and Dan's story. Mike, welcome back to Carey.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, and just going to have a conversation about you and about your brother Dan, and only in front of 1,700 people. But again, thank you for being here. Anytime we talk about your brother Danny, you know, there's always a smile on our faces. He had so much energy, a little crazy. You know, obviously think of him, you know, as a varsity football player, as a varsity baseball player, as a popular, fun-loving kid. What comes to mind when you think of your brother?
I think you pretty much nailed on the head that. I think me and my brother, you know, in terms of like the Carey population, we were looked at as pretty much as completely opposites in a way, you know, where, you know, I think we had similar groups of friends, but at the same time, the way he was kind of probably like perceived by his peers and by his teachers was this kid's an absolute lunatic, where I definitely found myself more as probably like the mild-mannered type.
Yeah.
But growing up, it was the exact opposite. So when we were, I would say, let's say from as early as, let's say I was like 6 years old and he was 8, he was 2 years older than me. I just remember times where, you know, we would be at like a playground or something like that, and he would be, well, if those kids are playing by the swing, you have to be the one to go talk to them first. I'm like, all right, for me, I'm like, okay, no big deal. It just was something that didn't even register. So then when I came here and I saw how he was in elementary school, and then when I'm in 7th grade, he's in 9th grade, and he's just completely different person who's kind of basically doing anything he could to get as much attention as possible, pretty much. And, you know, it wasn't always for the best, but then ultimately I saw what kind of, he was always just trying to get like a positive reaction out of people.
I was going to say, the attention that he was looking to get, though, I don't think it was ever negative. It was always, it was positive, it was energetic, it was, you know, I mean, he's the kid who would hug anyone in the hallway, right, from, you know, his teammates to his girlfriend to his coaches. Right. I mean, he, you know, he's just fun-loving and energetic, yeah. I mean, but I never saw a negative side to him, at least, you know, on the surface, which is, you know, when we talk more about him, you know, probably a little bit of the shock for, at least for the faculty, you know, the way we knew him, to hear that his story, you know, that was a bit of a shock for sure. And
to kind of piggyback off that, you know, again, if he ever did, you know, give someone a hard time or make it a little more difficult for a teacher, let's say, when they're trying to get a, you know, classroom to be a little more quiet, that was never the intent. The intent was to, you know, either make people laugh or just kind of keep everything a little bit loose. That was kind of the way I always interpreted it. And, you know, it's like you said, it definitely was a shock because that's the way his personality was. But I think one thing that we can learn from probably the last, you know, 5 years or so is you see a lot of people, you know, not comparing them to a celebrity by any means, but you see people like Robin Williams and these like high-level entertainers. I think Mac Miller was another one where, you know, their goal was to bring a lot of joy to people, whether it was through music, through acting, through whatever it was. But it just wasn't enough for them, and that's why they ultimately took their own lives. So, you know, I see a lot of parallels in that aspect of things. I think it's that type of personality where, you know, you're doing everything in your power to try and, you know, make lives better for others. I think Robin Williams had a quote, is those are the type of people who are probably struggling the most because they know, you know, how much difficult things could be.
Well, through something like this, you talk about making life better for others. You know, it's still an opportunity for Dan to do that. There's no question, just in the time that we knew him here, that seemed to be a big piece of him.
Yeah.
You know? Can you tell us about the day where you guys, as a family, whether it be individually, I don't know who you were with, but the day that you guys found out that Dan took his life?
Yeah, so myself, I was finishing up, at that time I was at LIU Post. I was a graduate assistant for the football team, actually. We were just finishing up, it was the end of the semester pretty much, I think May 1st. So I was just finishing up, getting ready for finals, everything along those lines. And that's when I got a call. I was in the cafeteria at the time, about to head home. Got a call from my stepdad, who actually, be remiss to not say, this past Saturday, he's celebrating 10 years of sobriety. So that's
Wow.
something that I just feel like I had to make a note of. But I got a call from him, which, not really uncommon by any means, but I can tell from kind of his voice that something was up. Mike, what's going on? He said, I think there's been an accident. You should definitely head your way home, head on home. You should meet your uncle and your mom. They're going to be there. I'm like, okay, well, what kind of accident? What's going on here? And I really had to push, for a while. He goes, to be honest with you, something happened with Dan. He owned Wheeler Deli, Valley Stream at the time, and that's when we found out, he may have shot himself. We don't know exactly what happened at this point, but go home, go find your mom, and then you guys are going to go to the hospital together. So at that point, I'm like, okay, this is real. I don't know. I didn't really know what to think, what to believe. I think this has to be a mistake. There's no way that something like that would happen. Obviously, he had his own, struggles at that point. We can get into a little bit more about that, but it just seemed like something that you don't. Anyone that you're around, pretty much every day, you don't think that they're capable of something like that. So that was the part that didn't make sense. That it just didn't. I couldn't comprehend it at the start. And I remember driving back home. It was the longest, 15, 20-minute drive I've ever had. Just saying, I hope this isn't the case, because, we were raised, I do have a stepdad now, but I was raised by a single mom for a long portion of my life, so I figured, she's been through so much as it is, so, if you kind of add this onto it, for love, please, if there's any reason why this isn't the case, make it for her specifically. Right. That's kind of where my mind went. Yeah. So then we found out that, it wasn't a joke, it wasn't fake, it was really real, and that's when, I kind of started, at that point, I was thinking, of all the people I had to talk to and I had to tell, because whether it was, I had finals coming up for grad school the following week, I had to, you try not to think about all those things, but it just starts popping up. It's like, this is going to affect pretty much everything from my immediate life, all the small stuff that you really were even considering, it just kind of completely melts away. So I figured, I remember I found one or two friends who could be, listen, this is the situation, this is what happened. You got to tell everyone who I have to let know that I'm not going to be around. Right. However long it may be. Yeah. So that, then it was pretty, that night, the word got around pretty quick, getting phone calls from people that, I never expected to kind of get phone calls from, kind of just sending their prayers and everything. And it was pretty much an immediate idea, that night, that we found out that, okay, this is something that's really going to impact, just more people just outside of our family and, his closest friends. It really, we saw an immediate impact from pretty much the whole entire community, which, it wasn't surprising, but I guess it's one of those things that you don't really expect until you see it. Yeah.
You mentioned your friends, you mentioned people trying to take care of the little things, I guess that day, that week, even, months to follow, I'm sure, to this day, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You're able to sit here and talk it, and your friends and Dan's friends have been able to talk it. How? I think people are watching this right now and hearing that story, that tragic, terrible story of again, this fun-loving, great kid, and you're able to talk it. That to me, I think, I think people maybe should hear why you're able to talk and why you're able to cope and why, because everyone experiences loss, but not everyone experiences loss in the way that you unfortunately have had to deal with it.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of factors that go into it. One, I just think it kind of has to do with just who I am and kind of how I was brought up, really. I think honesty was something that my mom really preached a lot when we were growing up. So, sometimes you see tragedies like this happen to families, and it kind of just changes their whole landscape. And that's fine. I never judge someone for how they react to, hearing that type of news, because I've always told people, I've had a lot of people reach out to me who've gone through something similar, and they say, oh, I don't know how you did this, I don't know how you started an organization immediately after, and I'm like, listen, if you have to go out and you have to, make a bunch of mistakes for the first, 2 or 3 months, if that's what it's going to take to get through it, that's what you got to do. I'm never going to be in a situation to be judgmental of someone who's gone through something similar. Right. So I just felt like, rather than try and hide behind it and, try and spin the story and make it sound like some accident, clearly it wasn't an accident. So it just made sense in my head that, if we're upfront and open and honest about this from the start, I think people will kind of embrace it. It appeared that I was correct about that. And also, I think at the time I was in my master's program to be a school counselor. So I remember just 2 or 3 weeks before, I actually attended a conference, and one of the main areas of the conference was 25, 30-minute PowerPoint based on, looking for suicide prevention tips and, trying to find warning signs, basically. So that was something that was a bit of a struggle to deal with in the beginning, too. It's like I literally went to a conference to learn to look for these warning signs, and they're just, to be frank, there just weren't any.
I was just going to say that not even looking back on it, nothing.
No, I mean, there were definitely, he had his own issues where, he did struggle with alcoholism at a point, he did struggle with a drug addiction at one point, and he did also have a little bit of a gambling issue as well. But, at that time, I believe he was like 8 or 9 months sober. So we figured things were kind of trending upward. It turned out that wasn't the case, but, I could honestly say, I always, there'll be days where I, can't sleep and I'm trying to think, what was it that I missed? What was it that, was there a cry for help that I didn't miss? And it really just came down to him just being an extremely prideful person, and he, for whatever reason, he just felt that he couldn't open up about these types of feelings, and, demons is the way we typically describe it. He just didn't feel comfortable really talking to anybody about it, and that's me, that's my mom, who he had a very close relationship with.
Right.
I mean, when I went away to school, my mom would complain that I wouldn't call her enough. We would 3, 4, 5 days, just checking in to see if you're alive. Yeah. And my brother was living at home, and he was calling like 3 to 4 times a day. So again, there's a lot of things that we are very different in a lot of ways, but where I'm definitely a little more guarded in terms of kind of how my personal feelings about it and everything, and he just took it to a complete extreme where he, his best friend, like you said, girlfriend, whoever it was, he just didn't feel that level of comfort that he could really to anybody.
Yeah. Talk about that day he surprised you at college.
Yeah, this was a cool moment. So at that time, I was at my senior year at a school called Mount Ida College, which actually no longer exists. Played Division III football there. And
won a ring.
Did win a conference championship, yep. And at that time, my brother was in a rehab center for his drug addiction. I had the opportunity to visit him before I left for a training camp. He was still there at the time that I left. Maybe 6 weeks later, we had my final homecoming game, and he ended up surprising me, which was really an awesome moment because I had no inclination that he was coming.
Right.
Ended up being a game that we didn't win, but I had one of my better moments of my collegiate career at that point. So to have him there, big touchdown. Yeah, still have a video of actually him. I could show it to you after this. Him from the stands, actually, kind of me entering the end zone, and just him and my whole family kind of going crazy. So that's one of those things that you can't even put a price on something like that.
No,
it's a memory that will never go away. So that was definitely a really special moment.
That is special.
Yeah.
Well, let's use that word memory to segue. A lot of hopefully what we're doing after people see this conversation is honoring his memory and talking about before how we like him to continue to help people. Dansplan. Talk about Dansplan.
Yeah, so it was pretty early on. Like I said, we kind of noticed that this was going to have a bigger impact than I think what we originally thought. So I remember sitting down with a couple of Dan's closer friends, and I didn't really have too much of a relationship with many of them. Jamie Spinopoulos was someone that I was very friendly with, but outside of that, I didn't really have it was just kind of hello, how you doing? That was really as far as it went. I remember sitting down with a group of them and kind of and they were all on board. It's like, listen, whatever you want to turn this into, like we're backing you 100%. Like we're totally on board. So we're throwing out the idea, it's like, all right, what could this be? What could we do? Like, what's the best way to kind of make an impact about this? So, of all people, you're familiar with Dennis Peterson.
Yeah.
He would just happen to be one of the people who stopped by, and he just said this term. It's like, yeah, he's gonna make an impact, and it's gonna be called Dansplan. Almost as like a throwaway comment, but for whatever reason, that just stuck with me.
Right.
And I kind of just wrote it down. I remember it was probably 2, 3 in the morning. I'm sitting down with a couple of people, some family members, my best friend Nick Farrar from class of 2010 as well. Just throwing around ideas like, what can we do with this Dansplan thing? So Dansplan, direct your attitude to notice the problem and seek help. Pass on what you learned, lead others to ask questions, and promote new beginnings. It's just something that kind of just hit me, like I said, 3:30 in the morning. We kind of ran with it. It turned into a GoFundMe, I believe, the second night, maybe May 2nd, May 3rd. Within 24 hours, I think $26,000 or $27,000 was raised.
That's incredible. And
probably since then, we've probably raised in the neighborhood of $100,000. So, it was that immediate impact, those first 2 or 3 days that we realized, like, oh wow, like this is, I'm just seeing comments that people were writing. Obviously, it was a lot of people who knew who he was, or knew who I was, knew who my family was. But at the same time, this was reaching people who said, I'm not familiar with who you are or where you're from. It for whatever reason, it moved people. And we had people who, they felt that they needed to kind of give to our cause. And we didn't really know what our cause was at that point, but we did know we made an impact pretty quickly.
So let's talk about that right now. So if there's a message, the time that you guys have spent, discussing Dansplan and doing these fundraisers and again, helping each other cope with his loss, what kind of message can we give now to our younger kids, especially on a day like today that we're trying to, get your story and Dan's story out there, so that what's the number one thing they can take away from an organization like Dansplan?
I think ultimately would be that I think it's very difficult for people, especially kind of for younger people specifically, to find someone to kind of talk to their problems through. Whether it's trying to find, it might not be the easiest thing to talk to a guidance counselor or a teacher or even a parent, someone who might be older than you, who you specifically feel that, they're not going to understand. They're not going to get it. I think a lot of pride is one of the main reasons why people have a lot of trouble talking about some of the things that they're struggling with. For whatever reason, maybe they feel that they're going to be bothering someone else. Maybe they feel that no one's capable of being able to help them. But ultimately, if there's any proof in what we've done, is that, I think this organization has kind of been a form of therapy for everyone who's been involved in it as well.
You talked about your brother having demons.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about your brother having struggles, and yet he never confided in anybody. And that's probably something that you and your family and his friends, probably one of the biggest struggles, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
What do you say to people watching this now? There may not have been warning signs to Dan doing something as drastic and so tragic, but he had struggles, So what would you recommend for those people right now that might have a loved one or even just someone that they know that are battling similar demons?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question because I think it is something that is very circumstantial. I think there are people who kind of go through the same things that handle it very differently. I think one thing that I've struggled with personally is I tend to have issues kind of really fully opening up about like about like a lot of the things that I might be struggling with, because I just think, well, in the grand scheme of things, is that even really a big deal? I've kind of trained myself at this point to think like the only thing you really should be like wasting or thinking about and really like putting a lot of like your emotions and a lot of things that you're worried about, unless it's like something that really is something that you're going to worry about. If this is something that only has like an immediate impact on your life, if it's not going to matter a week, a month, a year from that point, try not to waste as much energy on it, because I think that's something I've lost a lot of time doing, where I think rather than really like going out of my way to not think about this as much as possible and not talk about it to people who have questions and want to learn more about, what am I dealing with, I tended to focus on, work's been really difficult, or I can't get this right. Almost kind of creating my own wall. Mm-hmm. And when I kind of had this like epiphany, if you want to call it that I'm just doing exactly what he's doing. Maybe not to that exact scale, but I kind of at that point that was when I kind of realized it's like it's so much easier to kind of put all that stuff that is really serious to the side. Obviously, you can reach out. You can reach out and try and be there for the people that you think that might have these particular demons, but also just understanding where they're coming from. I think sometimes when people ask what's wrong, it kind of comes in a tone of, well, what's wrong with you? Like, how come you're not, like, how come you can't just tell me everything that's wrong with you right now? Mm-hmm. I think that could be something that's very kind of off-putting, especially someone who's going through something like that. I think the way you kind of, you don't want to feel as if you're like going at someone. I think kind of how you go up to them and be like, listen, I understand things might not be exactly how you want it right now. Just understand that there are people here who are willing to hear you out. It doesn't have to be today, but if there is a day where you just want to, you want to just go in the car, drive around, and just talk about some of the things that you might be going through right now, that's great. If you think that you'd be better off talking to someone with a little bit more of professional experience, that's great too. We can get you into those conversations. But I think reacting to someone who it almost feels like you're asking because you have to. I remember listening to a conference one time, and we have this ability to kind of ask people, oh, you're good, right? Like, and it's just the way you phrase the question, you're not really giving them an opportunity to say, no, I'm not good. Right. So I think just really giving people the opportunity to kind of speak their minds and not forcing it at the same time too. I think it's a very delicate situation, especially for someone kind of in that mindset. So really just maybe taking a moment, just letting them know you are there, and then maybe checking back a little bit later on and saying, the offer still stands if you want it.
So not just talk, but listen.
Yeah, and I think another thing, after you guys invited me here, I went on the PS I Love You Day website, and there was one quote on the website that I found really, really interesting. Tragedy should not be the force for togetherness, but togetherness should be the force that ends tragedies. So in a way, we kind of emulate that in a bit, because we had a tragedy and it kind of brought people together. And our whole thing is we don't want another tragedy to happen, so that's why we're together. So even though it took that, that's our goal is to have the least amount of tragedies from this point happen forward, because we've kind of dealt with it and we know what it feels like. We don't want people to go through that anymore.
Wow, that's perfect, and I'm sure there are people who've watched this today that, you know, just hearing your story and watching how you're able to tell it from the heart, and I think it's going to be really, really positive for so many people. So I can't thank you enough, and you know, just been great just being with you and listening to you talk about your brother and about you. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.